Welcome back. You are still watching Morning Live. Now, the Social Justice and Nation Building Commission has released its 253-page report finding that some of the cricket appointments were irregular and also addressing a number of other issues which have held back transformation in the game. To help us understand these matters, we've roped in cricket analyst Lunga Kupiso. Lunga, good morning and thank you so much for joining us today on Sports on Morning Live.
Good morning to the SABC viewers.
All right, now, Lunga, let's start with a couple of things before we talk about Graeme Smith as well as Mark Boucher and their appointments. Let's look at access to the game, both at the development and professional levels. Is the game reasonably accessible to all, and is the environment conducive for the majority to actually succeed?
Well, is the game accessible? I think on paper it is, because there are structures that have been put into place to make sure that that particular part of the conversation is covered, right? But that has been merely a ticking a box exercise if we realistically look and investigate and interrogate actually the implementation of such steps. Yes, there are certain franchises or certain unions that have gone above and beyond to ensure that the game is accessible to all, especially those who have been historically discriminated against in as far as access to cricket. What that means in the context of Cricket South Africa and Cricket South Africa reflecting is that perhaps the game is not so easily accessible for all. But obviously you cannot come off the blocks and say that the game is not accessible for all, because then it has plenty of ramifications that have consequentially led to the point that we are at, which is another hearing or somebody releasing some sort of recommendation to the mother body that they must enact on. But there is no real enforcement on such actions. And in 5 years' time, again, we'll sit and we'll be asking the same questions.
Which is rather unfortunate. Let's now talk about how we know that Cricket South Africa has set certain targets in terms of transformation and the inclusion of black players into professional teams. But we look at how South Africa came back into the sporting arena in the early 90s. Yet Themba Bavuma was the first black African test batsman, and that only happened in 2014. Isn't that a rather slow rate?
Yeah, I mean, the implementation, again, of these tick boxes, as I call it, has rather been slow. And the interrogation of the tick boxes themselves has been a process that has been lackluster from a Cricket South Africa point of view. So each year, the unions are given a report back on some of these rules and regulations that they are to bind themselves by, which was also a decision that Cricket South Africa took very late on, after the initial recommendations were instituted, or they were given that recommendation without an enforcement to allow them to allow the unions a time to develop themselves. What is that development? It's ensuring that they've got enough black talent within their pools, or players of color within their pools, so that when this is made a rule that you must have a minimum X amount of players, that there's no union that has to be kicked out of the franchise system, right? So that's the first thing that needed to be done. And that was a process in itself, because that was a process that had to be led by the unions and not led by Cricket South Africa, because the unions are on the ground. Yes, there are unions who have gone above and beyond. I'll say that again. Yes, there are. Maybe one, maybe two, 2.5 if we're really pushing it. But all the other ones, they've just settled with their scoring cards from Cricket South Africa, which, by the way, depending on what you are graded in as far as the works that you're doing towards the access of the game to previously disadvantaged or previously discriminated against communities, that also determines the amount of funding that you get from Cricket South Africa. And that was something that was introduced as a way to encourage unions to fast-track that process of bringing through black cricketers. But there are unions who are financially above others in terms of sponsorships and pulling in sponsorships. And so those unions then were never really in a position where they needed to make sure that they fast-track the access of the game to black cricketers or previously disadvantaged cricketers or cricketers of color. And that was something that Cricket South Africa never really followed up on, to be stringent, to be more stricter, to be more tighter, to enforce in a more rigorous way. And I think that has led consequentially to Themba Bavuma being the first black batsman since re-administration into the game to score a century at Newland, something that could have happened perhaps 5-6 years before, if we look at the stories that have led to where we are with the SJ hearings today.
Okay, Lunga, I want us to move on and talk about the adaptive mindset of the stakeholders, because if you look at how there's really been a slow ability for them to adapt to new needs such as inclusiveness and transformation of the game both on and off the field, would you say that they've failed the game in this regard?
Well, I think, look, if we're to look at additional stakeholders besides the unions to Cricket South Africa, I can openly say that perhaps sponsors have not been as transformational as cricket needed them to be, because they are the people that hold the game, the individuals who run and rule the game accountable, right? And they've not gone above and beyond to ensure that the representation we see on the field translates to what they as sponsors believe in, what is their ethos as the organizations that fund cricket. And that in itself speaks to that culture of accountability in South Africa that rules corporate South Africa, because we're asking corporate South Africa to essentially use its power as the funders of the game. But when they themselves, we know of stories day in and day out, South Africans complaining about representativity in the boardrooms, complaining about control and being heard as black voices in boardrooms. And so that has also translated itself into sponsors within the cricketing space. And of course, it helps that when you come in as a CEO, you can say, I've got a friend there, I've got a friend there, and I've got a friend there, and they can bring in all this support in funding into the union. Then it becomes difficult to go back to your friends and say, what are you doing for transformation?
I understand that. Now, Lunga, we are running out of time, and there's two questions I still want to get in. Let's talk about Graeme Smith as the director of cricket. I mean, it's a highly ranked position. We know he didn't come cheap, but was his appointment actually the right one? Because you look at how he didn't have much experience at that level of governance. But then again, you can look at an Andre Strauss, who also didn't have that much experience, and he was appointed to a similar position in England cricket.
Well, I mean, there are many lenses that you can look at. So it depends which side of the fence you're on. It depends how you want to view it and how much of your piece you wanna let go. Essentially, this Graeme Smith and Mark Boucher appointment, he definitely did not have the necessary qualifications for the position that he's in, even for the salary that he receives, and that's something that's been widely covered, right? Whether or not it will turn itself into the right decision as time, only time will tell, depending on the relationships that he has with the international market. And I'm sure that was part and parcel of the decision making in appointing Smith, is that he has the ability to connect with his former peers who are now running world cricket. And that's something that can only morph itself over time into a results-based decision. Personally, I don't think it was the right decision. I don't think he has the skill, nor does he have the aptitude for the job that he has. Certainly getting overpaid, and that's money that could be then used into really transforming the game, ensuring that the game is transformed both on and off the field. And it's such decisions really that disenfranchise black cricketers or black cricket administrators, is when you work all your life and when the opportunity arises, you are overlooked purely because there's someone else who happens to enjoy the luxuries of being non-black.
Lunga, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and there's no more time to talk about the coaching as well as Mark Boucher. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.